Many years ago, when I was a freshman in college, my roommate and friend returned from a class. Both of us had this class, but from different instructors. Returned from this class, and my friend had been religiously educated and raised in a church. But he returns and he says, "Did you know that the Bible teaches that there are many gods?" And I was like, "No, it teaches that there's one God." And he goes, "No. In the book of Exodus, when God said you're not supposed to worship any other gods in the Ten Commandments, he was telling them that there were other gods and don't worship them." And this is what this professor presented, and this is what my friend took away from that. And I just was like, no, there's just one God. But I didn't think through that for many years. And yet, as time has gone by, I have run into more and more people that think that there are more gods out there than just the God of Scripture, the God of the Bible. And we're going to look at the fact that, guess what? There are more gods. But just wait. Hold on. Before you shut this video off, we're going to explain this in just a little bit. I'm Pastor Tim Holscher, and we're looking at who is God. And we're looking at God, going to be looking at God's character, God's nature, what God does. And we're starting off with just the fact that the Bible teaches that there is, in reality, one true God. So let me assure, the Bible teaches that there's one true God. And we looked at these verses the other day. This is in Jeremiah chapter 10 and verse 10. It says, "But the Lord is the true God. He is the living God." The Lord is the true God. We also looked in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. "For they themselves report about us what kind of a reception we had with you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve a living and true God." Living and true God. Again, the same idea. So the scripture does present that there's one true God. And we could look at other verses on this. Probably one of the chief verses, the Shema of the Hebrews, the Jews, in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, is that, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one." There's one God. We don't believe in three gods. We believe in one true God. Psalm 82, however, says God takes his stand in his, I'm going to read first from the New American Standard and then the Net Bible. So I'm on the left. God takes his stand in his own congregation. He judges in the midst of the rulers. "How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Vindicate the weak and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them out of the hand of the wicked. They do not know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, and all of you sons of the Most High. Nevertheless, you will die like men and fall like any one of the princes." He says, I called you gods? Well, we don't see that, because up here in this verse, in verse 1, the New American Standard in 1995 rendered this rulers. If you were to look at their marginal note, they do say the congregation of the gods. And so we're going to go over here to that New English translation, the Net Bible. And it says, "God stands in the assembly of El, or the congregation of God, in the midst of the gods." Again, we have this. So this is just El. This is the short version of the name God, Elohim. So this is El, the strong one. And then we have Elohim, the gods, and he renders judgment. He says, "How long will you make unjust legal decisions and sow favoritism to the wicked? Defend the cause of the poor and the fatherless, vindicate the oppressed and suffering, rescue the poor and needy, deliver them from the power of the wicked. They neither know nor understand. They stumble around in the dark. While all the foundations of the earth crumble, I thought, you are gods." Now they've translated this "I thought," but it's Amar. I think I would say "I say," or "I've said." "You are gods, all of you are sons of the Most High, and yet you will die like mortals," or die like Adam, like man, "and you will fall like the other rulers." Now what is this and Jesus quotes from this, by the way, in John chapter 10, and what we have is a double mix that's going on here. He's addressing this is probably why we have rulers. He's addressing the rulers of the people of Israel, while at the same time addressing the spirit beings that are behind them. And so it's in the midst of those gods where he's looking at these people, that they're functioning like gods, they're being motivated by like gods, but he's standing in his assembly where these spirit beings have to come to him. You have this recorded in Job chapter 1 and Job 2. In Isaiah chapter 14 talks about the mountain of assembly. That's a place where God made himself present, and his spirit beings that he created, we popularly call them angels, but they're more than angels. Those spirit beings had to come and present themselves before him, talk to him. And I don't think they do it because God needs to find out what's going on. I think by them reporting in to God, it makes them realize they answer to him. And they are not just out there, just a free agent doing whatever they want. They're supposed to be doing his bidding. And so he refers to them, however, as gods, because from our human perspective, they seem to be like gods, small gods by comparison to the one true God, but small gods nonetheless. And this is very interesting because Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, when he's encouraging these believers to not knowingly participate in the sacrifices that were offered to idols around Corinth, and he says in verse 19, "What do I mean then? That a thing sacrificed to idols is anything? Or that an idol is anything? No, they're not. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons." Now, we've got a lot of negative connotation with the word demons, and rightly so, but the word demon was a term that was used in their culture of a lesser deity. So you had like top deities and then some others that were beneath them, but then these were like a lower caste of deities. They were powerful beings. So they were like gods, they just weren't like top tier gods. And so he says they sacrifice to demons and not to God, and I do not want you to become sharers in demons. So in other words, when these people practiced idolatry, and what were the idols? They were worshiping what they called gods. They had these gods that they'd made up, and they made these idols out of wood and silver and gold, and as they're worshiping these gods, they're actually worshiping the demons that are behind them, the spirit beings that God created. They're not creators. God created these spirit beings, but they were worshiping them. And so Paul says earlier in 1 Corinthians in chapter 8 about eating food sacrificed to idols, then we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is no God but one. Real plain. There is only one God. It doesn't say one God for us. Some people say that there's only one God for us. No, there's just one true God. For even if there are, and now he says here in verse 5, even if there are so-called gods, or one's being, literally the Greek is one's being called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God. In other words, this is a verse where people go, see, for us there is one God. No, but you're missing Paul's point. Paul said up above in verse 4, there is only one God. What he's saying in between here is that these are ones that are called gods, but they're not really gods. They're just very powerful from a human perspective. We look at them and they're more powerful than us, but they're significantly less powerful than God. And when I say significantly, I probably need to say significantly. That's the way Hebrew would say it. You doubled the word to really say really insignificant compared to the power of God. And so, yeah, there are other beings out there that are called gods, and people worship them as gods, and they receive the worship as gods, and they do some acts of power that kind of try to get people to maybe think that these gods are real. But they're created beings. They were spirits that God created long ago. And those spirits, as they move about out there, some of those spirits rebelled against God a long time ago. And in rebelling against him, they even now pass themselves off as gods. And people worship them as gods and have been for most of the time that mankind has been on earth. And yet for us, it comes back to the fact, as he says here in verse 4, and that there is no God but one. Or as Paul said, to serve living and true God. Or we could say the living and true God. There is one true and living God, the creator of all things. We'll look more at that another time, but we saw that in Genesis 1 on our first day, that there is God who created. He created everything, but he is uncreated. He has no father. He was not produced, and he wasn't created. And that's the God who takes an interest in us. That's the God who's working with us. He formed us. He put us here in this world, and we get this opportunity to relate to him. And I trust as we continue moving through these studies, it will encourage you more and more to think about, how do you worship God? Do you appreciate the fact that you're the one and only? There is no other God. Is that something you ever tell God in worship? That there is no other God. There is only you. It's not just there's only you for me. There is only you. Anything else that is called a God isn't really a God. It's something you created. But they're pretending it being a God. But they're not really. That's some worship there that you can engage with God with. Did you ever think about that? That's worship. Worship doesn't mean you go to church and sing a bunch of songs and you sing it a cappella, or you sing it with accompaniment, or you sing it with all your heart. That's not worship. Worship is when we are talking to God about who he is. That's biblical worship. And you can worship God for being the one true living God. And with that, I encourage you to have a good day in the Lord, and I thank you for joining me.